Hello, welcome to another episode of The Money Puzzle. I'm Eric Douglas, and this is Aaron McAndrew, and of course a production of Family Wealth Planning Partners. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. The topic for today, we're going to talk about the danger of thinking you have enough. Specifically, what we mean by that is going into retirement thinking that you've done everything right, and maybe you have, right? You've got enough money in the bank to be able to retire. And what that usually causes people to do at that point is to start thinking about de-risking their portfolios and taking risk off of the table, because now they become so paranoid about losing money because it's a sold fallacy, right? And one of the biggest retirement myths that we see is as you enter into retirement, you need to completely take risk off of the table. There's a lot of reasons that is kind of that mindset has been put into, into the air, if you will, in our industry. But, when you think about target date funds, what's the purpose of a target date fund that so many people use in their 401k? Well, there's a correlation of stocks and bonds. The stocks are really high when you're really young, right? And the closer you get to retirement, the allocation of bonds increases significantly up until the point where you retire, and it's almost nothing in stocks and just about everything in bonds. Well, it's that idea that people have is, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do as I enter into retirement. I'm supposed to completely de-risk because I don't want to take a loss in my account.
Right.
And it was with that fallacy or that myth in retirement that we really developed our risk-on, risk-off retirement strategies. But really specifically today, we wanted to focus on the fallacy of people thinking that they have enough to retire and they can completely take their foot off of the pedal, or off, take their foot off the pedal, so to speak.
And I'm going to start a little bit just with an example in my retirement plans when I'm in there doing account reviews. That's a question I would say that comes up at least once or twice a day when I'm in there doing account reviews with participants that are nearing retirement. And they always ask me, they say, at what age should I be moving it entirely to the fixed account? Or at what age should I be moving this all to cash?
Yeah.
And I tell them, that really depends. One, depending on the size of the account too, depending on when you're going to need to use the money. But most of the time it's never. You're never going to move 100% of this to cash because you're not going to probably need 100% of this money in their first year in retirement. So you may be moving a portion of it to the fixed account or whatnot. But that is what we're talking about right here is, hey, I'm getting ready to get retired, be retired, 2 years, 3 years. When do I move this thing 100% to cash? I don't want it to take a massive hit right before I go into retirement. So I want to put it all into 100% cash or into a fixed account that's paying like 1.something% or 2% inside of these plans. That happens all the time.
Yeah, and so we'll talk specifically about some of the immediate results of thinking you have enough and de-risking your account to far greater degree than it needs to be. And then we'll talk about our solution and how we developed our risk-on, risk-off strategies to alleviate that concern specifically. But let's talk about inflation first and foremost, right? That's always the big thing in the room. The big elephant in the room right now is, we've got year over year right now, inflation is down. I'm using air quotes because inflation is down to about 5% year over year. It was touching almost 10%. Now, when I say that inflation is down, that might lead you to think that the cost of goods and services are coming down. That's actually not the case. When we say that inflation is down to 5%, we're saying that the rate of increase is slowing down to now 5%. So your goods and services still cost a whole lot more than they did a couple of years ago, right? It's just that they're not increasing as quickly as they were, over the last year and a half. And so all that to say, if you were to completely de-risk your portfolio, there's always risk. And everyone thinks, oh, I want to take risk off of the table. Well, most people are typically talking about what?
Market risk.
Yeah. Talking about market risk because they don't want to be invested in the stock market because they think there's too much volatility. Well, okay, when you take everything out of the stock market, now we're bringing in purchasing power risk or inflationary risk. There's always a risk in whatever type of investment you have. It's just a matter of what the most suitable type of risk given your standing or your situation in life and whatever goals that we're trying to achieve. So if someone de-risks their portfolio to a far greater degree, you have some serious inflationary risk. When inflation was up, 9-10% year over year, and that's the stated number, by the way. I would argue that the real number
higher than that.
significantly. When I took my son to McDonald's not too long ago, got a quarter pounder with cheese and a medium shake, it's $13 at McDonald's.
Right.
I took my wife and my 2 daughters out to Qdoba last week. It was $45 for the 4 of us to eat at Qdoba. These numbers were unfathomable 10 years ago, that we would have to pay this higher price to go to McDonald's or something as simple as a Qdoba. Yeah. You even go into a restaurant, it's tough to get out of a nice restaurant paying less than $60 for 2 people. All that to say, inflation is a major risk that you are now incurring if you completely take market risk off of the table.
Yep. And let's go back to that fixed account example I gave at the very beginning here, is if you're moving 100% of your money into the fixed account that's paying 1%, even though you can't lose any of that with market risk, if the market goes down, you are losing in a sense, because you're not keeping up with inflation. So the longer you have that there, the money you're losing, because the cost of goods is going up, the cost of living is going up. So you're putting yourself in a position where when you do have to use it, you're going to have to draw out significantly more of that money, and it's not going to last as long.
And this is going to go in line with the same idea of inflation, right? But another thing that we think about, especially, and this is certainly not a knock on blue collar workers, but there's a blue collar mentality out there where, I've got Social Security, I've got a pension, maybe they got an annuity at some point. I've got 2, maybe 3 different forms of what we call permanent predictable income, that you will receive a paycheck for life. You're never going to outlive that paycheck.
It's not tied to the market.
It's not tied to the market. There's no risk. And they think, I've got my income coming in. I've got my paycheck replicated for the rest of my life. Well, that's great. And that's usually a solid foundation for a retirement income plan. However, that's a foundation. That should not be the entirety of your retirement income plan, because once again, bringing back purchasing power risk and inflationary risk onto the table, so many people think that, if I've got those forms of income coming in, I'm always going to be good, and that's just not the case. The average retirement lasts about 20 years. You think about, you retire in your early to mid 60s. We live into the average life expectancy is 82. Yep. Give or take.
Mid-80s, yeah.
Yeah, in the United States. So you're looking at a retirement that lasts typically about 20 years. Well, we just got done talking about how expensive Qdoba was. I remember what I was paying at Qdoba 20 years ago, and it was not $45 to feed 4 people. I could go get my chicken burrito for $6.
Right.
It was a very quick and easy lunch. It was fantastic for me, right? And that's just not the case anymore. I'm paying, $11, $12. We're talking about 10% inflation. No, that's 100% inflation compared to what it was 10 years ago. Those permanent predictable income sources, while they provide a great foundation for a retirement income plan, they do not keep up with the cost of living adjustments that occur naturally over time.
Even though Social Security will get a cost of living adjustment, it's not the real, for example, cost of living over the last year, even though the inflationary number was 9% or something, it got up to, not, at one point when it was its high, it got up to 9%. That was more like 20%, maybe higher, depending on what it looks like. Because you can go to a grocery, you used to be able to spend, get out of the grocery at $200 or $150 for a week or something like that, and you're not getting out of there now $300. Going to the grocery, yeah. $250 going to the grocery. So it's up significantly where it was. Look at the gas prices. Gas prices were at, depending on where you were in the country, gas prices in Louisville, Kentucky were at $2 a gallon a couple of years ago, and now you're paying about $4 a gallon. So, that's double. That's not 9%. So there's a lot of things that have gone up significantly. Well, guess what? Gas and groceries are 2 of them, and those aren't going away even when you're retired, unless you're going to sit in your house and not do anything, and you're not going to eat, and you're not going to last long if you don't do that.
Well, those fall squarely in your mug expenses, right? Your mortgage, utilities, and groceries, right?
Right.
Utilities is kind of an all-encompassing term for kind of the everyday essentials, right? And certainly, gas and groceries fall into that. There's a huge amount of risk that you're taking on if you think that these forms of income are going to be enough to sustain the lifestyle that you've become accustomed to, throughout your life. You spend decades creating and building a lifestyle that you want to preserve in retirement, and ultimately you're not going to be able to preserve that same standard of living if your entire income plan is to rely on these permanent predictable income sources that don't keep up with inflation. at a minimum.
Right.
Right. And so you're talking about the cost of living adjustments on Social Security. It was 7.8, 7.9%. I forgot the exact number, but it was right around there for that was the cost of living adjustment for 2023.
It's going to be significantly less than that this year because the inflation has come down, even though it's still costing you more. The cost of living adjustment is going to be less than that.
And it's also worth noting too, whenever you get that cost of living adjustment on Social Security, what else do you get that cost of living adjustment on?
Your Medicare premium.
Exactly. So if you're taking Social Security, most likely you are on Medicare. And so your Medicare premiums are going to go up the same amount of money that your Social Security checks went up. So typically you're robbing Peter to pay Paul at that point. Once again, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So the net effect of that cost of living adjustment on Social Security is even less than what we were hoping it to be.
And then cost of living adjustments may not even happen on pensions. Some pensions do have them. A lot of pensions do not have cost of living adjustments. And then if you have annuity income, guaranteed income from an annuity, most of the time those are just level payments. There are options that you can take that, but when you turn it on, usually that's a level payment that lasts, and doesn't matter whether it doesn't take an effect from inflation or not.
Talk about taking Social Security too early.
That's another thing that comes up. Usually I'll say when somebody's looking at retirement and they're planning this themselves, not using a financial planner, they look at this and say, hey, I'm going to take Social Security at 62. That's when I'm eligible to take it. I'm going to take Social Security at 62. I can retire. Maybe I have another pension, or I've got my spouse's Social Security that they turned on at 62 or whatever it might be, and we've got these forms of income. Sometimes that is the right thing to do. It just depends on what the plan calls for. But a lot of times that's a mistake too, because every year you defer Social Security, you're getting about an 8% raise. And that's 8% raise to your guaranteed income, not including any cost of living adjustment that would happen. Let's think about it like this. If you take it at 62, it's about a 32% discount from when it would be at full retirement age for some people in that range. Okay. So you're taking about a 32% pay cut from that point. If you have other assets, such as pre-tax money that you've saved in a 401k or a 403b or whatever your work retirement is, a lot of times people say, well, I'm going to take that Social Security so I don't have to touch that money. Well, if they don't touch that money and they're not drawing off of that pre-tax money, eventually they have to. At age 73 now, in 2033 it goes to 75, you're going to be forced to take what's called required minimum distributions. So if you've deferred that the entire time and not take any distributions out of that, and you've been taking your Social Security, not only did you take a 32% pay cut on your Social Security, you're going to get hit with what's called required minimum distributions, and those could be large amounts that could in turn cause that Social Security to be taxed, or more of that Social Security to be taxed, and maybe even at a higher rate. So at some point you could pay a great penalty by doing that, instead of saying, okay, let's look at a retirement plan, and maybe it makes more sense to defer your Social Security so you can continue to get the 8% guaranteed payout and draw down some of that retirement plan that you have to get income where you're paying some of those taxes on that now. Everybody's at a lower rate now because the tax cuts are going to sunset here soon. So
in 2026, yeah.
But you could do that, and then eventually you won't have as large of an RMD, which could save you more money on taxes and let you keep more of your Social Security, and you're going to get a greater Social Security payout.
There's too many publications in our industry, too much press given to maximizing Social Security. And while I understand the intent of wanting to maximize your Social Security income, it's not difficult. Here's the way to maximize your Social Security income. It's not a secret. You wait until 70, okay? You wait to file for your Social Security. You're maxing out your monthly payment, okay? And then you live to about 83 years old. Once you live to about 83 years old, you've beat that. That's about the cutoff time, where waiting until 70 years old officially becomes more cost effective or more beneficial than filing for Social Security at a younger age. That's the key to maximizing Social Security. Well, if you don't think you can do that, or if that's not something that's in your cards, let's say you retire at 63 and you can't wait until 70 realistically to turn on your Social Security. Well, maximizing is not in the cards for you, and that's okay. But we need to talk about optimizing your Social Security. That's a far more important topic, because we need to figure out when is the optimal time for you to take Social Security that's going to be best for your specific retirement income plan. That's not going to be the same for everybody, because it's going to differ by how much you have invested, how much you have, how much you're getting, well, what your Social Security benefit is, first and foremost, but do you have a pension, or do you have an annuity, or some other form of permanent predictable income in place to hold you over until you can file for Social Security. If you don't, then maybe you probably need to file early, because then we're sitting here figuring out the math to determine, okay, if you file early versus late, well, if you file late, you're having to draw down on your investments to a greater degree while we wait for your higher Social Security payment. Maybe that's feasible, and maybe it's not. The other thing too, and this is really the last topic that we have on today's subject, is people are living longer.
That also ties right into taking Social Security too early too, because that's the other risk, that you're living longer. People are living longer. That's the reason why they moved the RMD's age. They've moved that a couple times now since 2019. They've moved that RMD age up. Now the Secure Act 2.0 came out, and they're saying, okay, in 2033 they're going to move that RMD age to 75. So they're pushing it back even further down the road. So because people are living longer, if you take that Social Security too early, which we talked about, that's a permanent predictable income source, and you're getting cost of living adjustments like we've mentioned, but you're getting a 32% pay cut essentially, and if you live to be 95 years old, you're going to get that same payout at a significant lower rate, reduced rate. What if your IRA money does run out? What if your non-permanent, non-predictable income for that point does run out? Now you're in a significantly worse position.
Well, the reality is that's the biggest fear that most retirees have, is running out of money in their lifetime. And I saw an eye-opening stat years ago that really made me kind of think about this in a new light. If both spouses live to the age of 65, there is a 92% probability that one of those spouses will live to the age of 90. A 92% chance that at least one of those spouses, if both spouses in a marriage live to the age of 65, that one of them will live to at least 90. That's a 25-year retirement plan that you have to prepare for. Going back to the original topic, if we retire at 65 years old, and we think that we have enough money in the bank and we want to completely de-risk our portfolio, or de-risk to a large degree, that is a problem, because that's a long-term time horizon. That is a long-term investment horizon. How would you have told yourself at the age of 40 to invest if you were going to retire at 65? You were still probably at least a growth or aggressive investor, I would assume. Most people are at that age, as they probably should be. When you have that long of a time horizon to invest your money, it is of vital importance that at least a portion of your retirement portfolio is wrapped up in long-term assets.
That require risk.
That require market risk. Because at the end of the day, it all goes back to risk versus reward. You do not get the reward without the risk. It does not exist. Whatever amount of risk that you're able to accept, that's the greater the reward that you're able to achieve down the line. And we know, historically speaking, I'll knock on wood here, right? Because hopefully I'm not jinxing the market here, but I don't think I am, because the market's a pretty gigantic thing, right? But we know throughout history that if you have a 10-year time frame to invest your assets, every time from the beginning of the stock market, every time you start at the beginning of the 10 years and at the end of the 10 years, you have a positive gain. Now, it might not be a huge gain, but you have a positive gain. You don't have a loss. So if we're investing for a long time horizon, and once again, anything over 10 years is considered a long-term time horizon, we have to have whatever portion of money that you're going to need after 10 years invested in long-term assets, meaning that they are exposed to the stock market. Now, there's different ways you can invest in the stock market, and that's a discussion for a whole other day. We're not going to get into that, but they need to be tied to some level of risk that you are going to find with investing in stocks.
Along those lines, your short-term assets now, like we'll tie right back to the very beginning example that I used with the person that says, let's move it all to the fixed account. Your short-term retirement assets shouldn't have market risk. They're going to be, that's going to be any cash equivalencies that you're going to need, that's very liquid, that you can pull money out and use for what you need, or whatever the gap is from your permanent and predictable income to whatever the income need you're going to need to reach your retirement goals.
And this is the entire basis, by the way. I'll just say it, just to be very, very clear. This is the basis for our risk-on, risk-off retirement strategies, right?
Right.
So to your point, the bucket of money that we need in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years needs to be tied to cash or cash equivalents or some level of extremely low risk, meaning...
Yeah. And we're still earning interest on it.
Yeah, we're still earning some level of interest, but we're not tying it to any risk in the stock market, because you can't take that level of risk with the money that you need over the next 2 to 3 years, right? And we need to know that that's immediately accessible and immediately available at all times, because that's going to sustain your lifestyle for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yep. And with, like Eric mentioned, with that risk on, risk off, we are bucketing out the risk off portion of it and using using assets that are not directly correlated with the stock market to take away the market risk. There's still inflation risk. We're doing a pretty good job combating that with the interest rates you can get right now versus where inflation is year over year. And then the medium term or middle term, up to 10 years or whatnot, we're still using investments that are not tied to market risk, but still allow you to get greater return than the short term. So then obviously the long-term assets, like we mentioned already, are tied to the market. That's going to be your market risk. And then that bucket is your growth bucket that's going to turn around and continue to feed the other buckets as you work through your retirement. The one thing I'm going to end on here, really add to on this, is we've talked about the whole concept of this podcast, or this episode here, is the danger of thinking you have enough. Really, it ties back to, it's so crucial to have a retirement plan, to have a financial plan that helps dictate whether or not you have enough before you make that decision. Mm-hmm. You tie everything back to a financial plan, your retirement will be a lot smoother than somebody that just goes in and says, hey, I can get at Social Security at 62. I'm going to retire here at 62 and that's it. I think I've got enough money in the bank and I'm going to put it all in CDs or in safe investments.
Yeah, I know we always sound like a broken record, right? But it always boils down to planning. What is appropriate for your specific situation? What is appropriate for your plan? How do we complete that risk-off retirement strategy for you specifically? Because your risk-off retirement strategy is going to look different than someone else's. But you know what? They're all going to rhyme to some degree, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is we always want to create at least 10 to 15 years worth of retirement income that is not exposed to stock market risk. That's it. Doesn't mean it's not exposed to some other level of risk, but we are comfortable accepting a lesser amount of risk in these buckets in order to achieve a greater return in a long-term bucket, but we do have to take more risk in that long-term bucket. It's all about allocating risk correctly in your portfolio. Anything to add?
I think just planning is super important. That's the key of anything right now, especially as you're approaching retirement. But even before retirement, the earlier you start planning, the better.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching. If anything that we said today hits home with you, or any of our content you think any of your friends and family might benefit from hearing, please feel free to share it with them. We would greatly appreciate it. If you yourself are interested in receiving a risk-off retirement report, go to the notes in the podcast, click the link, or you can go to our YouTube channel and click the link there. Schedule your free, complimentary, no-cost risk-off retirement strategy. Look forward to seeing you in our office. See you next time.